Chapter 7. The Well. Frank's heartbeat triples its pace as the cold clutches at him. The shock of the water causes his breath to leave his lungs as panic floods into him. The beam from the flashlight drops down and down, deeper into the dark water. He struggles to pull himself out of the water, but as he pulls himself up a little, his numb muscles give way, refusing to work properly, and he slides back in. The flashlight flickers rapidly before it goes out completely and plunges Frank into darkness. He attempts to gather his final bit of strength, knowing this will be the last attempt before he freezes and drowns. With an iron will, he firmly grips onto the rope and begins dragging himself out of the murderous water. As he clutches for the top of the chasm, he sees the faint glow from his shelter. With all of his might, he heaves himself onto the ledge of the well and rolls onto the snowy ground below. Gasping for air, Frank lays there exhausted and numb. He can't feel his legs, and he knows he's not out of danger yet. He struggles to flip himself over and begins crawling towards the nearby door of his shanty. As he crawls, the snow sticks to him and begins freezing his clothes to his body. A path through the snow follows him as he slithers up onto the porch into the cabin. Firelight greets him, and he immediately drags himself across the floor, over to the fireplace. Warmth washes over him as he lays there for a while, thoughts of Rex running through his mind. Where could Rex be? Did the old woman take him? What was she doing out in the storm, and why would she take Rex? Eventually he slips off to sleep as the feeling comes back into his lower half. He awakens to the sound of a soulless howl from an unnatural beast. Frank jumps up off of the floor and looks around confused. He quickly looks out the front window, struggling to see out into the storm with the fog of the window and the snow blowing around outside. He uses his left sleeve to wipe at the cloudy condensation on the window, and a red streak smears across its surface. He glances at his arm and is startled by the fresh blood soaking his coat sleeve. "What?" he exclaims in surprise. He looks around the interior for signs of blood, but doesn't find any. He decides to check himself for a possible wound he didn't know about. When he rolls up his jacket sleeve, he reveals a bloody bite mark on his left forearm and a tooth sticking out of the wound. Feeling seems to rush back into his system, and the agonizing wound begins throbbing painfully. "Ouch!" he says through clenched teeth. "How did I get this?" He gently pulls out the large tooth and inspects it. "A wolf tooth?" he says to himself in a surprised tone. "What is going on?" A second howl rips through the air, drawing his attention back to the window. He quickly uses his other sleeve to wipe the window clean and squints out into the field. There are silhouettes of enormous wolves prowling around in the field nearby his home. They snarl at each other aggressively as they hunt for some unseen prey. Frank quickly drops down to the floor, getting out of view of the window. "Can this night get any worse?" he says, feeling crushed about Rex's unknown fate and utterly confused about the wolf bite. The wind bangs and clatters the walls and windows of the house as if responding to his comments and questions. He keeps low and makes his way over to the sink to clean and bandage his wound, pain still coursing through his arm while blood trickles off. As he washes the bite mark, still baffled on how it happened, the wolves begin barking and snarling more eagerly. Chills run through Frank as he thinks the wolves may have caught his scent. The pack of ravenous wolves sniff and paw around the shanty. A ragged breath, followed by the rhythmic tearing of claws, echo from the front door. A menacing growl rings ominously beneath the door as one of them begins ferociously digging, trying to break in. Frank doesn't move, frozen in fear and holding his breath. Chapter 8. Bite Mark. Frank slowly makes his way over to the front door where the metal poker is still leaning nearby. The thud, thud, thud of the large, powerful paws continues at the door. The other wolves in the pack are circling the home and barking wildly. He grabs the metal poker and raises it, ready to swing hard if the wolf manages to force its way in. The door begins to crack and splinter at the bottom corner where the wolf is digging and pawing at it. Soon the sound of teeth biting and ripping at the door fills the hut. Frank positions a swing to smash into the jaws of the beast as it gnaws to get in. He times his swing and waits steadily for the right moment. The wolf goes in for a large wooden bite, and Frank swings a ferocious strike into the mouth of the wolf. It yelps loudly, snarling as it recoils from the door. The other wolves charge through the snow to meet their companion. Heavy footfalls indicate that the pack is heading back into the field, snarling and barking, raging out from them as they move. Frank lets out an enormous sigh of relief. "That was close," he says while leaning heavily on the front door. He heads over to the sink to continue bandaging his mysterious bite mark. His stomach lets out a grumble, indicating its emptiness, and reminding him he would need to eat soon. After finishing bandaging up, he sets to making himself dinner. While cooking, Frank sorrowfully thinks about Rex and his odd disappearance. The temperature in the shanty is cold, and he glances over to the fireplace, which has nearly burned itself out. He finishes cooking and sets his plate on the kitchen table before heading over to the fire and tossing in a few more logs. He heads back to the table and starts eating dinner as the logs begin to catch fire. Shortly after eating dinner, he decides to try and take his mind off of Rex by reading next to the fireplace. He continues reading while sipping on a cup of warm tea. The drip, drip, drip of the roof leak has overflowed the buckets, and in all of the commotion of the day, he has forgotten to empty them. Realizing his mistake, he sets his book down and goes to fetch a mop. He makes quick work of dumping the bucket and begins mopping up the puddles that have formed from the overflow. The bite mark on his arm twinges and throbs painfully as he mops. After he finishes removing the water covering the floor, he replaces the buckets and decides to tend to his injury again. Blood has begun to show through the white bandages, and it's time to redress the area. He heads over to the sink where the medical kit still remains open and begins unwrapping his bandaging. The blood is thick and red in the bottom layers of the gauze. As he peels back the final layers, he reveals a sickening bite mark. The area around the teeth marks are heavily bruised, black and purple. The puncture marks are swollen and puffy, indicating that they may be infected. He winces as he cleans and rewraps the fresh bandages on the wound. "I hope whatever did this doesn't have rabies," he says worriedly. As he stands fully upright and steps back from the sink, the room begins to spin. A dizziness flows over Frank, and he stumbles around trying to steady himself against the sudden vertigo. The room around him rebalances and stops spinning. He manages to make it over to his bed and crashes down onto it heavily. He lets out an exhausted sigh and lays back onto the soft pillow. The flickering of the lanterns and fireplace are soothing, and his muscles begin to relax as his eyes start to slowly close.